Guam, I know it is said, is where the American day begins. And I would hope that all of you here today would join me in this prayer, that with this trip to China, a new day may begin for the whole world. Thank you very much.
50 years ago, U.S. President Richard Nixon delivered these remarks right before his groundbreaking trip to China. Nixon described the 8-day visit as the week that changed the world. We talked to Winston Lord and Chas Freeman, who accompanied Nixon back then. They shared with us the stories and the significance of the visit, as well as lessons for today.
We were extremely excited, and obviously this did turn out to be one of the 3 or 4 most fundamental geopolitical moves in the last half of the 20th century.
As an event, it certainly was the most important historical event that I participated in.
I've worked for several presidents, many of them closely. I've never seen any president prepare as carefully for an international meeting as I did President Nixon on this occasion. And all the way over on Air Force One, he would send questions back or verbally ask us for more information or greater understanding of what we had written. So right up to the very end, he was doing his homework. That Nixon and his public affairs people, I think understandably, instructed everyone, including Kissinger and Secretary of State Rogers, to stay on the plane or at least out of sight so that the first photographs would be strictly between Nixon and Joe. Within an hour or two of our arrival at the guest house, to our surprise, Joe and I came back and told Dr. Kissinger that Chairman Mao wanted to see the president. To my everlasting gratitude, Dr. Kissinger asked me to go along.
After the historic summit between Nixon and Chairman Mao, the Chinese hosted a banquet to welcome the U.S. delegation. Before the banquet, Freeman was called over to President, and Dwight Chapin, who was Nixon's appointment secretary, asked him to interpret the toast for Nixon. Freeman accepted, but asked to read the text first. The secretary, however, insisted there was no text.
I said, Mr. Chapin, it might interest you to know that I drafted the text for this banquet toast. I know that it has been slightly changed by the National Security Council staff and the President's personal assistants, and that some of Chairman Mao's poetry has been put into it. And if you think I'm going to get up in front of the entire world and the whole Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party and ad-lib Chairman Mao's poetry from an English translation back into Chinese, you are out of your mind. I am not going to do that. I guess I was still 27 years old. I figured my diplomatic career is finished.
At that point, Mr. Chapin took the text out of his pocket and gave it to Chinese interpreters. Freeman understood that Nixon wanted to show to the world he would make an impromptu toast. And Nixon did quote Chairman Mao's poetry at the end of his toast, calling on two peoples to build a new and a better world.
Chairman Mao has written, "So many deeds cry out to be done, and always urgently. The world rolls on. Time passes. 10,000 years are too long. Seize the day. Seize the hour."
This was the first really heavily televised international summit. And so every day, pictures were being beamed back to American audiences over their breakfast or dinner tables of the president, the Chinese leaders toasting each other, big banquets, the Chinese army band playing American songs, visiting the Great Wall, etc. And this had a tremendous impact along with the substantive outcome. And so to our relief and somewhat surprise, the opening turned out to be very popular.
In the following days, China and the United States held in-depth talks on the international situation and bilateral relations. after deliberations and discussions, the two sides issued the joint communique, or Shanghai communique, in Shanghai on February 28th.
It is amazing that 50 years later, this communique is still remembered and invoked as one of the guidelines for our bilateral policy. Most communiques disappear without a trace within days. So the Chinese foresight on this was well carried out, and it was a very effective way to begin our relationship.
Well, I think the visit and the Shanghai communique offer an important lesson for us today. And that is that it is possible to set aside ideological differences and differences of interests and pursue cooperation, notwithstanding those differences. So my hope is that instead of across-the-board confrontation, which has been pretty much what we've had for the last several years, that we will rediscover the merits of putting cooperation first and competition second.